My mother said 11 words on a Sunday evening that unraveled 29 years of everything I thought I knew about my family. 11 words, said casually, between passing the potatoes and asking if anyone wanted more chicken, and nobody at that table flinched, except me. I am Jess Calloway, 29, secondary school English teacher, middle child. The one my mother always says reads too much into things, which I've spent years accepting as a character flaw, and am only now beginning to understand was never a flaw at all. It was the thing that was going to eventually save me. The dinner was completely ordinary, right up until it wasn't. Sunday roast, my parents' house, my older brother Marcus, at the table with his girlfriend Diane, my younger sister Poppy, home from university. My father talking about something to do with the neighbour's fence. My mother moving between the kitchen and the table, the way she always does, never fully sitting, always in motion. Keeping everything running with the invisible precision of a woman who has hosted this exact dinner approximately 1,000 times and could do it in her sleep. I was in my usual chair, middle of the table. I am always in the middle of the table. The conversation had moved through the usual things: Marcus's work, Poppy's university, my father's fence grievance, Diane asking polite questions and receiving polite answers. Normal. Comfortable. The specific comfortable of a family that has been having the same conversation for so long that the words themselves almost do not matter anymore. It is the sound of them that matters, the familiar rhythm. And then Diane, who is kind and warm, and sometimes asks questions that land in rooms without understanding the architecture of those rooms, said to my mother, "Do you ever think about what you would have done differently? With the kids, I mean, if you had the chance again?" My mother laughed. The easy, comfortable laugh she uses for questions that do not require real answers. She said, "Oh God, where do I start?" Everyone smiled. And then she said, "Honestly, the only thing I think about sometimes is whether we push Jess hard enough. The other two always knew what they wanted. Jess was always just..." She paused, waved her hand, slightly content to drift. "We probably should have pushed more." 11 words. "We probably should have pushed more," said with a smile. Said between one breath and the next. Said in the same tone you would use to say, "We probably should have painted the living room blue." And then my mother picked up the serving dish and said, "Does anyone want more chicken?" And the conversation moved on. And my father said something about the fence again, and Marcus laughed at something Diane said, and Poppy checked her. Phone under the table, and nobody looked at me. Not once. I sat in my chair in the middle of the table, and I felt something happen inside me that I had no immediate word for. Not hurt, exactly. Not anger. Something older than both of those things. Something that had been sitting in a room inside me for a very long time and had just had its door opened for the first time. Content to drift. That is what my mother thought of me. That is what she had apparently always thought of me. Content to drift. I picked up my fork. I ate my food. I stayed for another hour and a half, and I helped clear the table, and I hugged everyone goodbye. And I drove home on autopilot, because my hands knew the route, even when the rest of me was somewhere else entirely. And when I got home, I sat in my car, in my own driveway, for 23 minutes. Not crying, just sitting, turning those 11 words over and over, like something you find and cannot identify, and cannot put down. If you are new here, please subscribe and hit the like button, and please stay until the very end of this story. Because what I found out in the weeks after that dinner when I started paying attention in a way I never had before is something I genuinely was not prepared for, and I do not think you will be either. Stay with me. I did not call anyone that night. I thought about calling my best friend Cara, but I could not figure out how to explain what had happened, because from the outside, nothing had happened. My mother had made a throwaway comment at dinner and moved on. That was it. That was the whole story. Except, it was not. And the reason I knew it was not was because I could not stop thinking about it. I am an English teacher. I teach 17-year-olds how to read beneath the surface of things, how to find the meaning underneath the words, and the meaning underneath that meaning, and the reason an author chose this specific word in this specific moment, and not a different one. I do this every single day. I am good at it. And my mother's 11 words were doing something to me that I recognized from the classroom. They were opening something up. They were pulling at a thread. And I have learned from years of teaching literature that when a thread pulls at you, that insistently it is because something real is attached to the other end. Content to drift. I thought about those 2 words specifically. Drift. The image it created. A person without direction, without purpose, moving wherever the current takes them, because they lack the internal navigation to choose a direction themselves. Is that what my mother saw when she looked at me? I lay in bed that night, and I did something I had not done in years. I went back through my memories, looking for evidence. Not of drifting, of the pattern underneath the comment. Because 11 words do not come from nowhere. They come from a belief that has been held for a long time. And I wanted to understand when that belief had formed and what had fed it and whether it was true. I started with the most obvious place, my siblings. Marcus is 32. He knew from approximately age 14 that he wanted to go into finance. Straight line. Degree, graduate scheme, promotion, current senior position at a firm that my parents mentioned by name at dinner, approximately once a month. My parents had been focused and invested in Marcus's trajectory from the moment it became clear, and they had watched it pay off, and they referenced it with the specific pride of people whose investment had been validated. Poppy is 24. She knew from age 16 that she wanted to study medicine. Another straight line. My parents had devoted significant energy to supporting that trajectory. Tutors, revision resources. The specific anxious attention of parents watching a child pursue something demanding and wanting to make sure every possible advantage was in place. And me, I had wanted to be a teacher since I was approximately 7 years old. I sat with that in my dark bedroom on a Sunday night, 7 years old. I had known what I wanted to do since I was 7, and I had done it. Degree in English Literature, PGCE, 4 years in the classroom. I was good at it. My students' results were consistently strong. I had been mentioned specifically in the school's last inspection report as an example of effective practice. I went home most evenings genuinely satisfied with my day in a way that I understood was not common and that I did not take for granted. I had not drifted. I had walked in a straight line towards something I wanted from the age of 7, and I had reached it, and I was living inside it. So where had the drift narrative come from? I started paying attention differently that week. Not dramatically. I did not confront anyone or change my behavior outwardly. I just listened more carefully, noticed more deliberately, applied to my family the same quality of attention I applied to a text in the classroom. What is actually being said here? What is underneath the words? What does the author, in this case my mother, actually believe? The first thing I noticed was small. I called my mother on Tuesday evening, the way I did most weeks. Ordinary call. She asked about my week, and I told her about a lesson I had done with my Year 11 class that had gone really well. We had been working on a piece of poetry, and something had clicked for a student who had been struggling all term, and it was the specific kind of moment that reminds you why you chose this work. My mother said, "Oh, that's lovely. Marcus got some good news today, by the way. Do you want to hear?" She did not wait for my answer. She told me about Marcus's news, a commendation at work, something his director had said. Details I did not entirely follow, but that my mother relayed with the bright, animated energy she reserved for things that genuinely excited her. I listened. I said, "That's great. Good for Marcus." She said, "Yes, we are really proud of him. Anyway, I should go. Your father wants his tea. Love you." She hung up. I held the phone for a moment. My moment had lasted approximately 45 seconds before being redirected. Marcus's moment had lasted 4.5 minutes. I noted it. Not with bitterness. With the careful neutrality of someone collecting data. The second thing I noticed came on Thursday. I had dinner with my parents that week, just the three of us, which was unusual. Marcus and Poppy were both busy, and my father mentioned that they had been looking at universities for Poppy's potential postgraduate options. I said she's only in her second year. My father said, "It's good to plan ahead. We want to make sure she has the right support." I said that's thoughtful. My mother said, "We were just saying the same for Marcus actually. If he wants to do an MBA at some point, we want to be in a position to help." I said, "That sounds good." Nobody said anything about me. Not as an oversight that they corrected. Just not at all. The conversation moved on, and I sat at the dinner table of my childhood home, and I thought about the fact that I was 29 years old, with a career and a life, and student loan debt that I was paying off on a teacher's salary, and the possibility of supporting me financially, in any capacity, had not crossed anyone's mind in this conversation. Not because they were cruel, because it had simply not occurred to them, because I was content to drift, because I had always figured things out, because I was the middle child, in the middle of the table, equidistant from everything, and apparently from everyone too. I drove home that night, and I called Kara. I said I need to tell you something, and I need you to tell me if I am reading too much into things. She said, "When have you ever read too much into things?" I said my mother thinks I am always reading too much into things. Kara said your mother also thinks slightly overcooking green beans is a personal style choice. Tell me what happened. So I told her. All of it. The 11 words, the Tuesday phone call, the Thursday dinner, the pattern I was starting to trace through 29 years of memory. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Jess, how long have you been carrying this, without noticing you were carrying it?" I said, "I think my whole life." She said, "Yeah, I think so too. Once you see a pattern, you cannot unsee it. That is both the gift and the difficulty of paying close attention. Before you see it, you are comfortable. After you see it, you are awake. And being awake is not always the easier thing to be." I started going back further. Not obsessively. I want to be clear about that, because I think there is a version of this story where a person becomes consumed by retrospective grievance, and I did not become that person. I was not cataloguing wrongs, or building a case, or preparing for a confrontation. I was just a reader, reading a text more carefully than she had before, following the thread to see where it led. And the thread led a long way back. It led back to primary school. Marcus had gone to the secondary school on the other side of the city, the better one, the one with the stronger results, and the more extensive extracurricular program. My parents had researched it carefully and made it happen. My father drove Marcus across the city every morning for 5 years. I had gone to the local school, not a bad school, fine. My results had been good, but when I had asked once I was approximately 11 whether I could go to Marcus's school, my mother had said, "The local school is perfectly fine for you, Jess," and the conversation had ended. Perfectly fine for you. I had stored that phrase somewhere without ever examining it. I examined it now. There is a specific economy of investment that families make, often unconsciously. They put their resources, financial, emotional, practical, where they believe the return will be highest, where the need seems greatest, where the trajectory seems to require the most support. My parents had invested in Marcus because Marcus was clearly ambitious, and ambitious children need fuel for their ambition. They had invested in Poppy because Poppy was pursuing medicine, and medicine is demanding, and demanding pursuits need resources. And they had not invested in me in the same way, to the same degree, because I had always seemed fine, and fine things do not require investment the way struggling things do, or ambitious things do. Fine things just continue being fine, on their own, content to drift. I thought about all the times I had been fine. The summer I was 17, and I had wanted to do a creative writing course that I had found online. It cost £300. I had asked my mother, and she had said, "We are a bit stretched right now, maybe next summer." Next summer came, and I did not ask again, because I had already understood the answer, and I did not want to hear it a second time. That same summer, Marcus had gone on a finance and business program at a university for 2 weeks. It had cost significantly more than £300. I know, because I had seen the brochure on the kitchen counter. I had not said anything. I had told myself families had limited resources, and the resources went where they were most needed, and Marcus needed them more than I did, and that was just how it was, and I was fine. I had been telling myself that story for 29 years. The story was not entirely wrong, but it was not entirely right, either, and the part that was not right had accumulated into something over 29 years that I was only now beginning to measure properly. The third thing I noticed, and this is the one that sat with me the longest, was about what happened when things went wrong. Things had gone wrong for me twice, in a way that was significant. The first was in my second year of university. I had gone through a period of genuine struggle, not academic, but personal. Something that I will not go into detail about, but that had required me to seek help, and that had taken approximately 8 months to get through properly. My parents did not know about it, not because I had hidden it from them, but because when it was happening, I had called my mother twice, trying to find a way in to the conversation. And both times, something had come up. Marcus needed something. Poppy had a thing. The timing was wrong. And I had not tried a third time. I had figured it out alone. The second was 3 years ago, when the school I was working at had gone through a restructure, and my position had been made redundant. I had been terrified. I had spent 6 weeks applying for positions, while managing the terror quietly, because I did not want to worry anyone, and because I genuinely believed that my worry was not the kind of worry my family had capacity for. I had told my parents about the redundancy after I had already secured the new position. My mother had said, "Oh, thank goodness, that worked out well." My father had said, "You always land on your feet." And that had been that. You always land on your feet. I had landed on my feet because I had spent 6 weeks working 18-hour days, applying and preparing and interviewing and managing my anxiety alone and making it happen through sheer focused effort. But the story my family had of me was that I always landed on my feet, as if I was simply lucky, as if the landing happened to me rather than because of me, as if there was no work underneath the outcome, no effort, no fear, no nights when I had lain awake catastrophizing and had to talk myself back from the edge of panic entirely on my own. Content to drift, always lands on her feet. The two phrases were connected. They told the same story about the same person. A person who floated through life without effort and without direction, and to whom things simply happened, rather than a person who had been working quietly and competently and without any visible support for 29 years to build something real. I sat with all of this for 2 weeks before I said anything to anyone except Kara, and then I said something to my mother. I want to tell you exactly what happened, because the telling of it matters. I did not go in angry. I had felt anger during the 2 weeks of paying attention. Not the hot, immediate kind, but the slow, burning kind that sits in your chest and gets hotter the more oxygen you give it. I had felt it, and I had let myself feel it properly, because I had learned from the second year of university that unexpressed feelings do not disappear. They just find other places to live in you, places that are less convenient and more damaging. But I did not go into the conversation with my mother in anger. I went in with something colder and more precise. I went in with clarity. I called her on a Saturday morning and asked if I could come over, just me and her. She said of course, and I could hear the slight uncertainty in her voice, because just me and her on a Saturday morning with a specific request to come over was not a pattern we had established. It was not how things worked between us normally. That was the point. I arrived at 10:30. She had made tea and put biscuits on a plate, and she sat across from me in the kitchen with the particular careful attention of a mother who knows something is coming but does not yet know its shape. I sat down. I picked up the mug she had put in front of me, and I said, "Mom, I want to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer before you give it to me. Not the comfortable answer, the true one." She said, "Okay, you're worrying me a little." I said, "I don't mean to worry you, I just need a real conversation. Can we do that? She said, of course. I said at dinner 2 weeks ago, you said something. When Diane asked about regrets, you said the only thing you sometimes wonder about is whether you pushed me hard enough. You said I was content to drift. My mother's face changed. Not dramatically, a subtle shift. The specific shift of a person who has said something they had not intended to be heard, or at least had not intended to be heard as clearly as it was. She said, Jess. That was just I didn't mean it as a criticism. It was just I said I know you didn't mean it as a criticism, but I need you to understand that I have been thinking about it for 2 weeks, and I have been paying attention to some things, and I want to talk about them with you. She was quiet. I said, do you think I have drifted through my life? She said, I think you have always been very easy, very self-sufficient. I think you never needed us, the way the others did. I said I learned very early that needing things from this family in the same way the others needed them was not something that was available to me. She opened her mouth. She closed it. I said I am not saying this to hurt you. I am saying it because I think there is a version of me that you have had in your head my whole life, and I want you to know it is not accurate. The version where I drift. The version where things just work out for me. The version where I am always fine. I said, Mum. I was not always fine. She said, what do you mean? I said, in my 2nd year of university, I tried to call you twice. I needed to talk to someone, and I called you twice, and both times something came up, and I did not try a 3rd time. She said, Jess. I didn't know what was happening. I told her, not everything, enough. Her face did something complicated while I talked. Something that moved through several expressions, without settling on any one of them. Something that I recognized as a person receiving information that rearranges things and not yet knowing where the rearranged pieces go. When I finished, she said, why didn't you tell us? I said, because I had already learned that there wasn't room. Not because you're bad people, not because you didn't love me, but because the room for difficulty in this family was already occupied by Marcus's ambitions and Poppy's needs, and I was always the one who was fine, so I stayed fine, even when I wasn't. She said, that's not we would have. I said, I know you would have. I am not saying you wouldn't have. I am saying I did not believe you would have at the time, and I believed that because of 100 small things over years that had taught me that my needs came after everyone else's. I picked up my tea. I said I told you about a lesson that went really well last Tuesday. A student who had been struggling all term had a breakthrough. I was really proud of it. You let me talk for about 45 seconds, and then you told me about Marcus's work commendation for 4.5 minutes. She was very still. I said, I timed it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I have been paying attention and timing things, and I need you to know what I found, because I think you genuinely do not know. She said, Jess. I said, I am not asking you to feel terrible. I am asking you to see me, properly. Not the drifting version, not the always fine version, the actual me. The one who has been working really hard for a really long time, with very little acknowledgement from the people whose acknowledgement I wanted most. The kitchen was very quiet. My mother was looking at her hands. Then, she looked up at me, and she said, I didn't know you wanted it. 4 words, different from my mother's 11 words 2 weeks earlier, but just as significant. I didn't know you wanted it. I said, I know you didn't. And I think that is the most important thing I have learned in the last 2 weeks. Not that you withheld it deliberately, but that I had become so practiced at not showing that I needed it, that I became invisible to you. And some of that is on me. But some of it is on the family. On the way things were set up. On the story everyone told about who Mara was, that made it impossible for anyone to see when the story stopped being true. I said, I want you to know the real story. She said, tell me. So I did. I talked for a long time. About the creative writing course. About the redundancy. About the 2nd year of university. About the local school, and the question I had asked at 11, and the phrase, perfectly fine for you, that I had stored, and never examined until now. About the middle of the table, and the equidistant from everything feeling, and the specific loneliness of being the child who never needed anything, because needing things had not gotten me anywhere. My mother listened. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself, or justify, or explain. She just listened. And when I was done, she said, "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not a but. I didn't know one. Just, I am sorry, Jess. I am sorry for the creative writing course, and for the university years, and for Tuesday on the phone, and for not seeing you as clearly as I should have. I am sorry." I sat with that. It was not a perfect apology. It was not a complete resolution of 29 years. It was not a scene from a film where everything is understood and forgiven in one afternoon. But it was real. And real is the most I had ever hoped for, walking into that kitchen. I said thank you. She said, "What do I do now to be different?" I said, "Start with Tuesday phone calls. Ask me about my week, and let me finish answering before you tell me about Marcus." She almost smiled. She said, "That is very specific." I said, "I am an English teacher. I pay attention to specifics." 6 months have passed since the Saturday kitchen conversation. I want to tell you where things are, because the honest version is always more useful than the tidy one, and the tidy one is not available here. My relationship with my mother is different. Not transformed, not healed in a cinematic way that makes everything that came before it feel like a necessary step toward a beautiful destination. Just different. More honest. More careful on her part, in a way I can feel. More open on my part, in a way that is still sometimes uncomfortable, because I have spent 29 years practicing not opening, and the muscle for it is not yet strong. She calls on Tuesday still, but she asks about my week now, and she listens to the whole answer before she moves on. 2 weeks ago, I told her about a parent evening that had been difficult, a father who had been dismissive of his daughter's ability in a way that had frustrated me professionally and personally, and my mother listened to all of it, and at the end, she said, "You really care about your students. You always have." I said, "Yeah, I do." She said, "You are good at what you do." I don't think I have said that enough. I said, "You haven't, but thank you." She said, "I mean it. Your grandfather was a teacher. Did you know that? He used to say it was the most important work there was." I did not know that. I had not known that. And something about discovering that piece of my own history in a Tuesday phone call, 6 months after a Sunday dinner, made me feel connected to something I had not known was there. My relationship with my father is slower to change. He is not a man who does emotions at speed. He processes slowly and privately, and eventually arrives somewhere real, but the journey takes time. He has called me twice in the past 6 months, in ways that were clearly his version of reaching out not to talk about feelings directly, but to include me in things. He called to ask my opinion on something he was reading. He called to tell me something had reminded him of me. Those calls are small, but they are not nothing. Callum I have not talked to about any of it directly. He does not know about the kitchen conversation. He does not know about the 2 weeks of paying attention. He is not a person who is likely to understand the significance of what I am describing, and I have made a decision consciously, deliberately not to spend energy on conversations that are unlikely to produce understanding. That is a boundary that is mine to set, and I am setting it. Poppy is the unexpected one. Poppy came home last month for a weekend, and we ended up talking late on the Friday night, the way we used to when she was in 6th form, and I would sit on the edge of her bed, and we would talk until midnight, about everything, and nothing. We had not done that in years, and I had not realized how much I missed it until we were doing it again. At some point she said, "Can I ask you something weird?" I said yes. She said, "Did you ever feel like you were kind of invisible in this family, growing up?" I looked at her. I said yes. "Did you?" She said sometimes. Not in the same way as you, I think, but sometimes. Like Callum was the oldest and you were. She paused actually. "I don't know what you were. What were you?" I said the middle one. She said, "But like, what did that mean for you?" And I told her. Not everything. Not the whole 6 months of paying attention and the kitchen conversation and the thread I had followed. Just enough to show her that the thing she had half noticed was real and had a name and was something I had spent time understanding. She listened in the way that younger siblings listen when they realize an older sibling has been through something they did not know about, with a quality of attention that is half recognition and half something that looks like relief, like the thing she had half noticed had been waiting to be confirmed. She said, "I think I have been doing the same thing, actually, just getting on with it, not asking for things. I said it runs in the family." She laughed. I said we should probably stop running it. She said, "Yeah, probably. Here is what I know now." The 11 words my mother said at dinner were not a revelation of something new. They were a confirmation of something I had always known and never named. And the naming of it was not the painful part. The naming was actually the relief. The painful part was the 29 years before the naming. The years of believing the story my family told about me because I had not yet developed the distance to read it clearly, content to drift. I have thought about those words many times in the 6 months since the dinner, and here is what I know about them now. My mother was not describing me. She was describing what she could see, and what she could see was limited by what I had allowed to be visible, which was limited by what I had learned was safe to make visible, which was limited by a family dynamic that had formed before I was old enough to question it, and that I had moved through for 29 years, as though it was simply the weather. It was not the weather. It was a structure, and structures can be examined, and examined structures can be changed. Not all at once. Not without effort and discomfort and conversations that require you to say things you have never said in rooms where saying them feels dangerous. But changed. I know that now. I did not know it 6 months ago. And the knowing came from 11 words, said casually between passing the potatoes and asking if anyone wanted more chicken on a Sunday evening when nobody was paying attention, except me. I was paying attention. I have always been paying attention. It just took 29 years for the thing I was paying attention to show itself clearly enough to act on. And when it did, I acted. That is the story. Not a dramatic one. Not a story where anyone is a villain, or anyone is a hero, or anything explodes in a single decisive moment. Just a woman who heard something at dinner and stayed very still and followed the thread to the end and found herself on the other side of it, seeing her family clearly for the first time, and deciding what to do with everything she saw. If you made it to the very end of Jess's story, thank you. This one was quiet and real, and I think some of you felt it in a very specific place. If any part of it got you the 11 words, the Tuesday phone calls, the creative writing course, the second year of university, or that last line about following the thread to the end, drop it in the comments right now. Tell me which moment hit you. I read every single one. If Jess's story moved, you share it, right now. Send it to someone who has always been the capable one, the always fine one, the one who lands on their feet, the one who nobody worries about because worrying has never seemed necessary. They need to hear this story. Like this video if you stayed until the very last word. Subscribe because my next story is going to stop you completely in your tracks. I will see you then.